She survived 3 wars. She buried squad mates in 4 different star systems. She learned how to eat ration paste cold because heating it drew fire. She once went 11 days without sleep, real sleep, and came out the other side with a battlefield commendation and a permanent twitch in her left hand she never bothered explaining to anyone. She survived things we don't have proper words for. Things that, when I first read her file, made me close the document, sit with my secondary heart rate boost for a full standard minute before I could continue. And now she was going to fail out of an academy classroom. I know how that sounds. Pretty much, I know. Plus, but there's something you need to understand about human beings, something it took me 3 years embedded with their military and approximately 140 hours of incident reports to finally grasp. They aren't invincible. I think that's not the thing. The thing is, they know they're not. They have always known, and they show up anyway, every single time, with their hands shaking and their eyes red and some terrible small joke loaded in their mouths like a last round in a mag. Sergeant Mara Voss showed up on the first day of the Interspecies Command Integration Program carrying a cracked canteen, a sidearm she absolutely was not authorized to bring, and 11 years of war behind her eyes. The Academy had survived wars too. It had never survived anything like her. What follows is my field log, reconstructed from real-time notes I kept, badly, mostly while holding cold nutrient gel I forgot to drink, across the 63 days of the ICIP, first cohort. I'm the narrator. Plus, my name is Vesan Orth, 3rd Class Integration Observer, Hegemony Academic Oversight Division. My official job was to assess whether the program worked. My unofficial job, as it turned out, was to watch a human woman take an educational institution apart at the seams using nothing but stubbornness, spite, and occasionally a cracked canteen. Log entry, day 1. To be fair, 0611 station time. She was late. She was the only one who was late. She showed up eating something. Plus, she was eating dried something. I couldn't identify it from across the corridor. It was brown and flat, and she was folding it into her mouth with the specific mechanical focus of a person who eats because the body requires fuel, not because food has ever been a pleasure. 11 other candidates had arrived between 0530 and 0605. They stood in assigned formation in the orientation bay. 4 hegemony standard officers, 3 from the Kareth Compact, 2 from neutral territories I'd been briefed on and immediately forgotten, and 2 humans. You know, both in uniform. Plus, both on time. Mara Voss made 3. She came through the side corridor because the main entry was locked at 0600 and I checked the footage later, simply walked around the entire academic ring until she found a maintenance bay with an unlocked hatch, climbed through, and emerged on the wrong side of the orientation bay with dried ration in her hand and absolutely no visible remorse. Director Fane clocked well, her at 0611:42, which I know because I'd started keeping timestamps compulsively somewhere around day 1 and never stopped. I mean, it became a thing. I'm aware. Candidate Voss, Director Fane said. He has the kind of voice that sounds like a formal complaint filing itself. You are 11 minutes late. Voss looked at him. She finished the piece of ration she was chewing. She said, I found a gap in your perimeter. Silence in the bay. That, she said, is usually the kind of thing someone wants to know about. She held his gaze for exactly as long as it takes to make a point, then broke it, walked to the back of the formation, and stood at ease like she'd been there since 0530. Director Fane stared at the space where her attention had been. Then, he turned back to his podium and continued the orientation brief. I wrote in my log, day 1, 0612. Something is going to happen here. I don't have a gift for understatement. The Interspecies Command Integration Program exists, because 6 years of multi-species coalition warfare had produced one consistent outcome, tactical brilliance that couldn't communicate across species lines. Every race had commanders who were extraordinary within their own doctrine. What nobody had was officers who could sit in a joint room, understand 4 different cognitive frameworks for risk assessment, issue orders that didn't accidentally constitute a cultural insult to 3 of the 4 parties receiving them. ISIP was supposed to fix that. 12 candidates. 60 days. Curriculum developed by the Hegemony Educational Council, peer-reviewed by Kareth scholars, and grudgingly tolerated by the two neutral territories who needed the treaty concessions too badly to complain about the syllabus. The humans were sent because they had one too many joint operations to be ignored anymore. Sergeant Mara Voss was sent because she was the only soldier whose file every species review committee had approved without comment. I read that file 3 times before she arrived. The fourth kind of time, I poured myself a cup of station-brewed stimulant that tasted like industrial solvent, and spent 2 hours staring at a wall thinking about what 11 years does to a person. Her psych eval used the phrase functional under extreme duress 7 times. It used the phrase unconventional tactical cognition 4 times. It didn't use the phrase will get along well with structured academic environments. The first real test wasn't an exam. It was a simulation, coordinated command response, designed to measure how candidates integrated information across a mixed team under stress. I watched from the observer's booth. I'd nutrient gel. Cold again. I kept forgetting to heat it. The scenario, a civilian, evacuation under fire, resources split between 3 groups, communication partially degraded. Each candidate in the room commanded 1 notional unit. They had to coordinate. What actually happened was this. The Kareth officer, Tarav, young, extremely decorated, extremely certain, immediately established a command hierarchy based on Kareth's seniority protocol, which gave him operational authority over the humans' notional units. Neither human challenged this verbally. Voss just stopped reporting to him. Plus, not dramatically. Not as a statement. She basically simply started routing her unit updates to the other human candidate, a younger man, Lieutenant Caro, who had the slightly startled expression of someone who'd just been handed a live thing, and coordinating with 2 of the neutral territory candidates directly. Tarav noticed on the 3rd exchange cycle. Plus, Sergeant Voss. His translator rendered it in clean, formal standard. Your unit has sent reporting through the command chain. My unit's operational, she said. Evacuation Corridor 7 is clear. You're welcome. That isn't. Corridor 9 is about to get cut off. She was already looking at Caro. Which pull your second element left. Caro pulled his second element left. 30 seconds later, in the simulation, Corridor 9 got cut off, on one side. The other side was already reinforced. Tarav was quiet for a very long time. I wrote 0914, which she didn't argue doctrine. She just stopped being subject to it. Watch this one. Director Fain pulled me aside after the debrief. Your assessment of today's session. I thought about it. Candidate Voss showed effective operational instinct and willingness to improvise outside established command structures. That's a generous reading of insubordination. She achieved the scenario objective. By undermining the assigned command hierarchy. By routing around its slowest point, I said. Fain looked at me the way he looks at things he has decided to file formally later. She's here to learn integration protocols, Observer Orth. Not to optimize them on day 3. With respect, I said, which is a phrase that, in academic administration, means I'm about to disagree with you while making eye contact. I don't think she saw it as optimization. I think she saw a corridor about to get cut off, and made a decision. He left without responding. I drank the rest of my cold nutrient gel, and thought about the word insubordination and how it's, in my experience, almost always applied to whoever was right in a way that inconvenienced someone above them. Cultural cognition theory. 3 hours of it. Plus, I want to be fair to the curriculum. The material was full, and the hegemony scholars who developed it had spent years cataloging decision-making frameworks across 12 species, documenting the ways that different cognitive architectures produced different evaluations of the same risk scenario. It was good work. It was sort of, also, as Voss's face made very clear across 3 hours, aggressively theoretical. She didn't interrupt. That's the thing I want to note. She didn't cause a scene, didn't challenge the lecturer, didn't do anything a conduct report could describe. She sat in the 3rd row with a physical notepad, paper, actual fiber pulp paper. I'd never seen a candidate bring one before. And she wrote things down and she asked, at the end of the lecture, one question. When the Kareth Compact and Hegemony units ran the Artaval corridor engagement 2 years ago, the one where the joint command structure collapsed at the 18-hour mark, which of these frameworks would have predicted that failure? The lecturer paused. That engagement isn't part of this curriculum. I know. She waited. The specific analysis of that engagement is outside the scope of this module. Right. She looked down at her notepad, made a small mark. So the frameworks we're learning, How many actual joint engagements have they been tested against post hoc? Another pause. Look, longer. The frameworks are developed from how many? Not aggressive. Just a for what it's worth, question shaped like a wall. The lecturer said, the validation studies are available in the supplementary materials. Boss wrote something down. I couldn't read it from where I was sitting. Caro, next to her, was staring at his desk with the expression of a person who is trying very hard not to have a visible reaction. Tarav, 2 rows up, had gone very still. I found the supplementary materials that night. Plus, the validation, I guess. Study cited 3 post hoc engagements. One of them was a training exercise. One was a border dispute that lasted 40 minutes and involved no casualties. The third was the Arteval corridor engagement. The framework hadn't predicted the failure. I wrote nothing in my log that night. I just sat with that for a while. First, formal assessment, written, individual, no collaboration. Hegemony standard, I think, format, present a joint command scenario, select the correct integrated response from 4 provided options, justify with reference to curriculum doctrine. Voss scored 61%. This was, technically, a failing grade by the program standards. Director Fain notified me formally. I read the notification twice. Then, I pulled her answer sheet and read through it. She hadn't selected wrong answers. She had, on 6 of the 12 questions, selected an answer and then written, in the margin, in that dense, economical handwriting, why the provided options were all inadequate and what she would have actually done. Her actual answers, the ones she'd written in the margins, were correct. The assessment rubric had no mechanism for scoring margin annotations. I sat with that for a while too. I went to Voss's quarters. I'd never done that before. Observers didn't interact directly with candidates outside of formal sessions. But I'd her answer sheet in my hand and a question I couldn't stop asking myself, so I went. She opened the door immediately, which suggested she either hadn't been sleeping or had been sitting very close to the door. She looked at me. At the answer sheet. Back at me. Come in, she said, in the flat tone of someone who has been expecting this conversation. In my opinion, her quarters were regulation sparse. The only non-standard kind of item was a photograph on the desk, small, worn at the edges, laminated. I didn't look at it long enough to make out the faces. I put the answer sheet on the desk. You answered correctly. 61% says otherwise. In the margins, I said. You answered correctly, I think, in the margins. She looked at me. Something in her expression shifted, not softened, exactly, but unlocked slightly, the way a door shifts when the pressure on the other side changes. The rubric doesn't score margin annotations, she said. I know you know. She picked up the answer sheet. Set it back down. So why are you here, Observer Orith? I'd a prepared answer. I'd been drafting it the whole walk over. I said, how many people from Arteval are still in active service? She didn't answer immediately. TBH, 11, she said. Out of 214. I nodded. I picked up the answer sheet. I left. In my log, I wrote, day 13. Plus, 2,203. The curriculum has no mechanism for scoring what she knows. That is the program's problem. Basically, not hers. I don't know what to do with that. I still don't entirely. But, I guess, I was starting to understand that the question of whether Mara Voss could pass this program was the wrong question. The right question was whether the program could survive her. She failed the second assessment. 58%. The margin annotations TBH were longer this time, and I shouldn't have been awake at 0340. I was, because the stimulant they brew on this station doesn't so much wear off as negotiate a surrender, and the surrender schedule is entirely its own business. I was sitting in the observer's booth with a dead cup, and my third review of Voss's assessment history when I heard footsteps in the simulation bay below. I looked down through the booth glass. She was running the corridor engagement scenario. Alone. No proctor, and no authorization code that I could identify, which meant she had either borrowed one or found another maintenance hatch. The simulation was set to its hardest difficulty setting, the one reserved for senior assessment. Communication degraded by 40%. Unit responses lagged. 2 of the notional allied commanders were programmed to make category errors under stress. She ran it for 2 hours and 14 minutes. I watched the whole thing, which I forgot to note the timestamps after a while, which, for me, means something. She failed the scenario 3 times. Each time, the failure was different. Each time she reset without visible reaction, not frustration, not discouragement, just the specific stillness of a person conducting an experiment. On the fourth run, she stopped trying to compensate for the two commanders making errors. She started routing around them the same way she'd routed around Tarav on day 3. Not correcting, not arguing, which just building the operation in the shape of what she actually had, not the shape of what the doctrine said she should have. TBH, the scenario ended. Green. She stood in the empty simulation bay, in the blue ambient light, and looked at the results display for about 15 seconds. Then, she picked up her notepad, wrote something, and left. I sat in the dark for a long time after that. Tarav came to find me. This was unusual. The Kareth candidates generally treated the observer position as institutional furniture, present, noted, unaddressed. Tarav was no different until he was standing in my office doorway with his expression arranged into something carefully neutral. "I've a question regarding curriculum methodology," he said. I gestured at the chair, which he didn't sit. "Sergeant Voss's assessment scores are confidential," I said. "I'm not asking for her scores." He paused. "I reviewed the Arteval engagement records last night. The public summaries. I waited. The command structure failure." He was choosing his words the way you choose footing on uncertain ground. "The contributing factors listed include communication latency, doctrinal misalignment between hegemony and Kareth units, and the phrase used is a breakdown in established hierarchy." That's in the official summary. The Kareth commander at Arteval was the ranking officer. Hegemony protocol gave him operational authority. Tarav's jaw was doing something controlled. 203 people. I said nothing. "She knows," he said. "She was there." Not a question. "Her unit was one of the 11 that came out." I said. "I don't know what she saw. That's not for what it's worth, in the file I've access to." Tarav stood in my doorway for another moment. "The to be fair scenario I ran on day 3, he said. "The corridor." "Yes." I was wrong. He left before I could respond. I wrote, "Day 23, 11:40, Tarav reviewed Arteval. Whatever the Kareth doctrine position is on this, it's going to be different in 6 months. Watch that thread." Third assessment. To be fair, Voss scored 63%. The actually, margin annotations had started to organize themselves. They weren't random objections anymore. They were building something. An argument, laid out across 6 questions, that the current Joint Command doctrine had a structural flaw in how it weighted seniority during communication-degraded scenarios. I read it twice. Then, I send a copy, annotated observations only, no candidate identification, to a colleague in the Hegemony Military Doctrine Review Office. She responded in 4 hours, which is fast for doctrine review, with, "Where did this come from?" I wrote back, "Field observation. ISA program." She wrote, "This is going to make some people uncomfortable." I wrote, "Yes." Caro found me between sessions. Lieutenant Desh Caro, the other human candidate. Younger than Voss by maybe 6 or 7 years, which in human military terms meant he'd come in after the worst of the multi-species conflicts and learned doctrine in an environment where joint operations were already normal infrastructure. Good scores. Adaptive. Genuinely curious about, in my opinion, the other species frameworks in a way that wasn't performance. He'd been watching Voss the way I'd been watching Voss, I realized. But, from inside the cohort. "She's going to fail out," he said. Not distressed. Just factual. "Possibly," I said, "and the assessments are designed to reward recall of curriculum doctrine." He had his hands in his pockets. "She knows the doctrine. She just doesn't agree with parts of it." That's an accurate summary. She's not wrong about the parts she doesn't agree with. Also accurate. Caro looked at the far wall. She pretty much hasn't said anything to me about what she's doing. She just shows up, scores what she scores, writes what she writes, does the simulation work at night. He paused. I checked the booking logs. She's run the corridor scenario 47 times. Didn't he known it was 47? "She's not trying to pass the assessments," Caro said. "I mean she's. But that's not the point of what she's doing." "No," I said. "She's documenting something." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "The other to be fair candidates are starting to notice. Even Tarav runs the supplementary scenarios now. Nobody talks about it. We just all show up in the simulation bay at weird hours and run hard difficulty scenarios, and then go back to our quarters." I thought about that. Does she, know you're all doing it? Caro smiled. It was a small, complicated expression. She set the booking logs to shared visibility 3 days ago. "We, I guess, can all see when anyone else books time. Fourth assessment. Voss scored 61%. I was in Fane's office before the sun. The station's artificial solar cycle, the one we all pretended was a real sun, had finished its morning sequence. She will fail out at this rate, Fane said. The program minimum is 70. The program minimum is a number assigned to a rubric, I said. The rubric is measuring doctrine recall. The rubric is measuring integration competency. Those aren't the same thing. Fane folded his hands. He has a particular way of folding his hands that means I've had this conversation before, and it didn't end well for the other party. Observer Orcs, your role is assessment, not advocacy. I'm assessing. My assessment, for what it's worth, is that the evaluation instrument has a validity problem. The evaluation instrument was developed by, I know who developed it. I put Voss's fourth assessment on his desk. Read the margin annotations. He didn't touch the document. Her job, he said, is to demonstrate mastery of the curriculum as written. Her job, as I understand the program's stated objectives, is to demonstrate capacity for effective multi-species command integration. Those are different things. Plus, in her case, noticeably different. The silence was the kind that gets filed formally later. If she fails to meet assessment standards, Fane said, she will be removed from the program. That isn't a threat. It is the procedure. I know the procedure. Then, we understand each other. We understand each other, I said. I picked for what it's worth, up the assessment, I left the simulation bay at 0200, and I'd started coming down most nights. Warming my nutrient gel first, finally, which made it slightly less terrible, and felt like a personal victory I was keeping private. Voss was running a new scenario, one I didn't recognize from the curriculum library. I pulled up the bay's log from the observer interface. She'd built it herself. Uploaded it at 2340. The scenario was Arteval. Not the official training reconstruction. Not the public summary version. Something denser. She'd built it from after-action fragments, casualty disposition records, communication log timestamps. Things that were technically available but that nobody had assembled into a working simulation before because it required knowing which records to pull and how they fit together. I watched her pretty much run it. She ran it for 90 minutes. She didn't try to win it. That's what I realized eventually. She wasn't running it to find a solution. She was running it to understand, precisely, at which decision node the failure had become inevitable. She found it at the 40-minute mark. The moment the Kareth commander, acting on doctrine, had issued a consolidation order that pulled hegemony units out of position, and the hegemony units, also acting on doctrine, had complied, because the doctrine said they should, and the gap had opened, and the gap had become a corridor, and the corridor had become 203 people. She stood and looked at the display. I realized I was holding my breath. Plus, she wrote in her notepad for a long time. Then, she shut down the simulation, picked up her things, and walked toward the exit. She stopped at the door, and, I know you're up there, Observer Orcs. I'd been in the booth with all the lights off. I'd no idea how she knew. I've been timing you, she said. You show up about 40 minutes after I start. Every night. I didn't say anything, which you sent my margin annotations somewhere. Not accusatory. Flat. Doctrine review, I'm guessing. Based on response time. I said, yes. Did they respond? They called it uncomfortable. She made a sound. You know, not quite a laugh. Something adjacent to one, the kind that comes out of people who have spent a long time not laughing. Good. She left, and I sat in the dark and thought about the 40-minute mark, and the consolidation order, and the gap, and 203 people, and 11. Fifth assessment. Well, 72%. No margin annotations. I read it twice, checked the candidate number 3 times, and then sat very still for a full minute. She had answered the questions. She had answered them using curriculum doctrine, citing the correct frameworks, using the prescribed structure. Every answer was technically aligned with the rubric. Every answer was also, I noticed, framed slightly differently than a rote recall response. The doctrine was in there. But it was in there the way a soldier carries a weapon, as a tool with a known capability and a known limitation, deployed deliberately. She'd learned to speak the language. She hadn't become the language. I wrote, Day 51. 10:37. She figured it out. She didn't change what she thinks. She learned to translate it into a form the rubric can score. Don't know if that is a victory or a compromise, and I suspect she isn't sure either. Caro came by again. Tarav passed his command integration practical yesterday, he said. Top mark in the cohort. I saw. He ran Arteval 49 times. He told me. I thought about the shared booking logs, the silent cohort showing up at odd hours, the thing that had grown in the simulation bay without anyone announcing it. Other candidates, I said. Everyone above 70 on the last assessment, Caro said. Which is everyone? Mara's the last one to clear it. He paused. She knows. Does she? She hasn't said anything. He looked at the floor. She doesn't, usually, and say things. No. But, she moved her simulation sessions to 1400. He looked up. So we, to be fair, can all book time after. Final assessment. To be fair, Voss scored 78%. I was in the observer's booth when the results processed. I'd basically warm nutrient gel, which I forgot to drink anyway. The graduation ceremony for the ICIP first cohort was brief and formal, and I wrote down the timestamps for all 12 candidates receiving their completion acknowledgments, because apparently that is just something I do now. Afterward, in the corridor outside the ceremony hall, Voss stopped next to me. She wasn't looking at me. She was actually looking down the corridor at nothing in particular. Your doctrine review contact, she said. Did they do anything with the margins? There's a working group now, I said. Preliminary review of joint command waiting protocols. 6 months, probably, before anything formal. She was quiet. The working group, I said. They asked for more materials. I told them they'd have to wait until the candidate completed the program. She turned to look at me. Something passed basically, across her face. Not quite surprise, not quite anything I'd a word for. Of a lot of margin annotations, she said. I know. She picked up her bag. She looked down the corridor again. 11, she said. From Arteval, there are 9 still in active service. 2 took medical. I didn't say anything. Plus, I wanted you to know the current number, she said. She walked away. I stood in the corridor for a while. Then, I pulled out my log and wrote the time. I, for what it's worth, didn't write anything else. Some things don't need annotation. 6 months later, the Hegemony Joint Command Review Board published preliminary findings recommending a structural revision to seniority-weighted protocols in communication-degraded multi-species operations. The working group cited 17 documented engagement failures. Arteval was in the index. Plus, Mara Voss's name was not. It never is.